I found the folder by accident. That's the part people always expect to be dramatic, like I was snooping or suspicious or already halfway to the truth. But I wasn't. I was just borrowing my dad's laptop because mine had died in the middle of a deadline, and he'd tossed it onto the couch with a casual, "Don't mess with anything important." I didn't intend to. The folder was already open. It was on the desktop, unmissable, labeled with my full name. First name, middle name, last name. No abbreviations. No jokes. Just my name, typed cleanly, like a medical file or a legal case. I remember staring at it longer than made sense. There was a strange physical sensation that came with it, like when you miss a step on the stairs and your body reacts before your brain does. Something felt wrong before I understood why. At first, I assumed it was photos. Parents save photos. That's normal. Even when it's excessive, even when it's weird, photos make sense. But the folder icon didn't look like photos. Inside were subfolders. Dates. Years. My stomach tightened. I told myself I was being dramatic. That maybe he'd scanned school records or tax documents. That maybe he'd organized things digitally the way some people do when they don't trust paper. I clicked. The first file wasn't an image. It was a document. Typed. Structured. Bullet points. The title was a date from when I was 13. Under it were sentences. Refused dinner. Claimed stomach pain. Later ate snacks in room. Argument after being asked about homework. Defensive posture. Eye contact minimal. Tone elevated. I didn't understand what I was reading at first. I read it twice, then a third time, my brain scrambling to place it into a category that made sense. It wasn't a diary. It wasn't notes. It was a report. I scrolled. There were dozens of files like it. Hundreds, maybe. Spanning years. Each one documenting me. My behavior. My mood. My reactions. Some were neutral. Some were clinical. Some felt judgmental in a way that made my skin crawl. I opened another. This one mentioned my bedroom door being closed too long. Another referenced how often I showered. Another described my friends by name and included opinions about whether they were good influences. My heart started racing. I told myself to stop. To close it. To forget I'd seen any of it. But something had already shifted. I clicked again. This one had a different tone. It was longer. It mentioned patterns and escalation and risk indicators. Risk. Indicator. Words that didn't belong in a father's observations about his child. I felt dizzy. I minimized the document and noticed something worse. There was another folder. Not dated. Labeled analysis. I opened it. Inside were spreadsheets. Columns. Color coding. Charts. Frequency of episodes. Triggers. Compliance scores. There was a tab called Interventions. Another called Monitoring. Another called Contingencies. My mouth went dry. This wasn't just observation. This was tracking. I stood up so fast the laptop nearly slid off the couch. I had the sudden, overwhelming urge to leave the room, the house, my own body. I checked the hallway. My parents were still out. Grocery shopping. Ordinary errands. Ordinary lies. I sat back down. I needed to know how far it went. I scrolled further. There were audio files. Short clips. Dated. Timestamped. I didn't open them at first. I didn't want to. Something deep inside me already knew what they were. I clicked one anyway. At first, I thought it was static. Then I heard my own voice. Younger. Softer. Nervous. I was talking about school. Complaining about a teacher. Saying I felt tired. The angle was wrong. Too clear. Too close. It wasn't recorded on a phone in the room. It was recorded from above. From somewhere hidden. I stopped the audio and stared at the laptop like it had grown teeth. I thought about my bedroom. The vents. The smoke detector my dad had insisted on installing himself. The way he'd always known when I was awake. The way he'd comment on conversations I didn't remember having near him. The way he'd say things like, "You seemed off last night," even when I hadn't spoken to anyone. I felt sick. I searched the folder. The word camera appeared in several documents. So did microphone. So did coverage blind spots. I don't remember when I started crying. I just remember my hands shaking so badly I could barely move the cursor. This wasn't concern. This wasn't protection. This was surveillance. And it hadn't stopped when I turned 18. The most recent file was dated 2 weeks earlier. I was 24. I closed the laptop just as I heard the garage door open. I sat there, frozen, my mind screaming while my face stayed neutral. I don't know how I pulled it off. Muscle memory, maybe. Years of being watched had taught me how to perform calm. My dad walked in and smiled like nothing in the world was wrong. "Did you get your work done?" he asked. I nodded. I handed him the laptop. He didn't notice anything. Or maybe he did, and that scared him more than I realized. That night, I lay in bed and thought about every moment I'd ever felt like I was being evaluated instead of loved. Every time I'd been punished for something I couldn't explain. Every time my parents had predicted my reactions with unsettling accuracy. They weren't guessing. They were studying. And I had been their subject. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound felt amplified. The house creaked the way it always had, but now each noise carried intention. I kept imagining lenses adjusting, microphones flicking on, data being logged somewhere I couldn't see. I lay perfectly still, staring at the ceiling, afraid that even shifting my weight would be recorded and categorized. In the morning, I tested something. I went into the bathroom and whispered my own name. Nothing happened, of course. No alarms. No confrontation. Just silence. But my hands were shaking as I brushed my teeth. I spent the next few days acting exactly as I always had. Calm. Polite. Predictable. I laughed at my dad's jokes. I answered my mom's questions in the same neutral tone she preferred. Inside, I was mapping the house differently now. Not as rooms, but as zones. Lines of sight. Places I felt watched most intensely. My bedroom was the worst. I started changing clothes in the bathroom. I stopped talking on the phone inside the house. I played music softly at night, not to relax, but to interfere. I didn't know if it worked. I just needed to feel like I was doing something. I went back to the laptop when I could. Always carefully. Always briefly. What I found was worse than I expected. The interventions weren't punishments in the traditional sense. They were subtle. Controlled. Designed to shape me without me realizing it. Sleep deprivation when I seemed too independent. Withholding affection after non-compliant behavior. Sudden rule changes to create uncertainty. There were notes about reinforcing anxiety so I would self-regulate more aggressively. I had grown up believing I was naturally anxious. That something in me was wrong, fragile, unstable. Reading those documents, I realized how carefully that anxiety had been cultivated. There was even a section labeled Outcome. It described me as highly observant, risk-averse, eager to please, and unlikely to rebel. I felt hollow reading it, like someone had summarized my entire personality as a successful experiment. I kept looking for a reason. Some justification that would make this make sense. Mental illness. Paranoia. Something. Then I found the emails. They were archived, but not hidden. Conversations between my father and someone whose name I didn't recognize. The tone was professional. Detached. They discussed long-term observation, data reliability, and ethical gray areas. Ethical. Gray. Areas. One email mentioned that I had exceeded expectations. Another said, subject shows strong internalization. Minimal external enforcement required. Subject. Not child. Not daughter. Subject. I finally understood why my mother always deferred to my father when it came to me. Why she'd say things like, "Your dad knows you better than you know yourself." He did. Because he'd been documenting me for years. I confronted my mother first. I asked her, calmly, if there were cameras in the house. Her face went pale so fast it scared me. She didn't ask why. She didn't say no. She just whispered, "You weren't supposed to find that." That was the moment I stopped feeling confused and started feeling angry. I asked her how long she'd known. She said she didn't know everything. That she'd agreed to monitoring when I was younger because my dad had convinced her it was necessary. That it would keep me safe. That it would help me. She said she stopped asking questions after a while. "Why didn't you stop him?" I asked. She looked at me like I'd asked something unreasonable. "He's very convincing," she said. I asked if she knew he was still doing it. She didn't answer. I confronted my father that night. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't accuse. I asked him one question. Why? He didn't deny it. He leaned back in his chair and studied me the way he always had, eyes sharp, assessing. "You were interesting," he said. That was it. Interesting. He told me he'd always been fascinated by behavior. By patterns. By how environment shapes outcomes. He said most people wasted their children by being inconsistent. Emotional. Sloppy. "I was careful with you," he said. "I gave you structure." I asked him if he loved me. He paused, just long enough to be noticeable. "I'm proud of the results," he said. Something in me snapped. Not loudly. Not violently. Quietly. I stopped seeing him as my father in that moment. I saw him as someone who had watched me suffer and taken notes. I packed a bag that night. I didn't announce it. I didn't explain. I just left. I stayed with a friend at first. Then another. Then I found a small apartment with thin walls and no history. The first few weeks were unbearable. Without the constant pressure, my anxiety didn't disappear. It exploded. I didn't know who I was without being observed. I second-guessed every thought. Every reaction. I waited for consequences that never came. Therapy helped. Not because it fixed everything quickly, but because the therapist believed me. She called it what it was. Abuse. Surveillance-based psychological abuse. The realization was devastating and relieving all at once. I wasn't broken. I had been engineered. I changed my name legally a year later. Not because I wanted to erase myself. Because I wanted to choose myself for the first time. I still catch myself performing sometimes. Sitting straighter. Moderating my tone. Anticipating judgment. But now, when I notice it, I remind myself of something important. No one is watching anymore. And even if they were, I'm not their subject. I'm not data. I'm not a folder on a laptop. I'm a person who survived being turned into an experiment. And I finally get to live unrecorded.